listening to the Marketing in Yoga Pants podcast, a podcast in sisterhood for female entrepreneurs that serves up savvy, actionable marketing advice and interviews with creative business owners who are in the trenches, building their businesses as we speak. The Marketing in Yoga Pants community is for you, the girl on her couch, in her yoga pants, top knot tight, hunched over her MacBook, trying her hardest to get the word out about her business. So in the name of supporting each other while supporting ourselves, bringing community, sound marketing advice, coffee, chocolate, and wine together for you, yoga pants wearing business owner, in a world where followers mean nothing, but paying customers mean the world, join us on this week's podcast episode and in our private Facebook group where you'll meet your soul sisters and build your business in yoga pants. Welcome back to another episode of the Marketing in Yoga Pants podcast. I'm Brit and I'm here today with Sarah Peck, founder of Startup Pregnant. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
All right, so Sarah and I just connected on this call for the very first time. I first found Sarah through Steph Crowder. I know she interviewed you. She talks about you all the time. And I thought it was super interesting what you do, Sarah. And so I started following. I don't have kids. So the whole Startup Pregnant thing, you wouldn't expect me to really want to be a part of it, but I am. I love it. I'm so enthralled by the conversations that you have with women on your podcast and just everything your company stands for. So I'm really pumped to get to chat with you today, get some insight into your business, your industry, your marketing strategy, and what makes it all tick. So Sarah, you ready to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. I'm so glad you love it. It's such a topic that we think it doesn't apply to us, and then we realize that, oh wait, we're all making babies somehow, or we're connected to people, or somebody's having a baby, and then all of a sudden it starts to, I think, unlock this really interesting conversation. So I'm glad you like it.
When you're talking about pregnancy and having kids, there are so many life applications to that. So whether you have kids or not, you can apply these lessons to everything. And as you've explained so well in all of the conversations you have, the lessons that you learn in having babies, raising babies, all of that can so correlate to your business and how you grow that baby and vice versa. You know, the things that happen in your business can illuminate things that are happening in your family. And so it's all there, and I so dig it. All right, so to start off here, I would love for you to tell the listeners, how do you earn your living?
Yeah, for a long time, I was a communications consultant. So I helped people with writing projects and books and thought leadership. I did ghostwriting, and I built courses. Back in the day when everyone was building courses, it seemed, I had an online writing course and a thought leadership and content strategy course. And that was how I made my living for quite a while. And I've also been in various companies. So the funny thing about getting older is that your work experience starts to really stack up. And I keep thinking of myself as an entry-level person because I keep doing new projects. But I'm like, oh, well, I've been doing that one for a decade, and that one I've been doing for 15 years. So today I'm the founder of a new company. It's called Startup Pregnant. I've been working on it for about 2 years. And we're very much a work in progress. I'm building the company in layers. We have a content platform, a podcast, a free community, and now a paid community. And I am so grateful to be at the helm of this. Startup Pregnant is a place where we interview women entrepreneurs, female founders, about their journey in business and in parenting. And just like you said, it's so interesting to watch because you can replace the idea of a baby with anything. And ask the question, how do you get work done when your time is limited? How do you deal with people that are really challenging? Because whether it's a colleague or a toddler, there are really challenging people in our lives. And what are some of the ways that women are held back or discriminated against in work, and why? And what does that mean for the future of work? And it turns out we have really profound conversations about the future of work and I don't want to say work-life balance because I think that that's a really loaded term, but the choices and the decisions that we make in our work and in our lives and about what matters to us, what's important to us. So that's how I make my living. I don't know, did that answer your question? That's like really broad. I can go into more specifics if you want.
Yeah, we'll probably get to the specifics here in a little bit. What I have to take away from that and just kind of underline is the word profound. Your conversations that you have, like I said, you guys, I listen pretty religiously. They are profound, and you have a unique way of getting, at least me, I don't know, I won't speak for anybody else, but at least me, to think about things in a different way. And it's very acceptance driven, really kind of just laying out that there's not one right way to parent. There's not one right way to be pregnant, right? And just along the same lines of there's no one right way to start a business. And there's no one right way to run a business in Girlwood. It's just everyone has their own experience. And the fact that you're opening up those conversations around those experiences, they are profound. They're so encouraging and thought-provoking. So yeah, we'll get into the specifics of how that brings in revenue and earns you your living. But I want to go back and understand how you came to do this with your life. How did you get here?
So we could talk for hours and hours. Like
for
if we
sure.
have a cup of tea or a glass of wine, I could yeah, we could sit on the couch. But the kind of highlights are that I did college and got myself a master's degree. I went to a fancy architecture school, and I studied how people work and how to design places for people. I was really interested in studying the behavior of people within different contexts, because we spend a lot of time harping on how much our habits or willpower are influencing our behavior, when about 50% of the reason why we do anything is because of the environment that we're in. And I remember reading this study when I was in college. I was taking an environmental psychology class, and they talked about going into a drugstore. And they said, what are the behaviors that you're going to see inside of a pharmacy or a drugstore? And they were like, it's probably not likely that you'll see someone playing a piano, because that's not the environment that you're in. You will see browsing and shopping behaviors. You will see people stopping in line. You will see people impulse buying candy it's literally called the impulse section. Like when people are mapping out stores, that's the impulse section. And they're trying to get flashy things in front of you for you to buy. You'll see toddlers screaming because they don't want to be there. And I got fascinated with this idea that we could, if we could influence our environments, we could optimize ourselves. And what did that mean at the design level? So I actually spent 5 years in working in landscape architecture and out in California in the San Francisco Bay Area with a global firm. And I learned a ton about computer-aided drafting and drawing and design, and ended up wanting to talk about what was happening, what we were doing. And I wanted to write about it. So I started kind of accidentally, I started a magazine. And the magazine took off because it was in the heyday of social media around 2008. And I was dipping my toes in all of that, which led to a lot of attention by people in the industry that said, well, how did you do this? How did you go around the traditional paths of publication? And how did you make this thing? And from there, I got a lot of consulting jobs. How do you do social media strategy? And what does it look like to be a writer on the internet? And how do you set up a blog? Started coaching people in writing, started teaching writing. I taught at General Assembly a couple storytelling classes, which were really fun to teach. And the level of geekery here, I will totally confess to, is very high. I list all the books that I read on my website. When I wanted to start teaching storytelling, I went out and I read 80 books. I think it was 85 books on storytelling, marketing, positioning, copywriting. Like I just craved it and I wanted to learn it. And I also didn't have kids, so I could read at night more than I do. And just, that inquiry led me down this tumbling path. I got to work with so many awesome companies. Fast forward a little bit to Startup Pregnant. At the time, I was working at a startup. We were a venture-backed startup based in downtown Manhattan. It was a team of about 10 people, mostly guys, mostly single guys in their 20s, a couple in their 30s. And I was 30. I had just gotten married. And I knew that I was going to have kids, or at least I was going to try to have kids. Didn't know if I could have kids. You make that assumption. A lot of us have a lot of assumptions about what our bodies will do.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hey, I'm going to start trying to get pregnant. So if we work together, I think this is going to be another puzzle we have to figure out. And the CEO was so awesome about it. He's also a good friend. He's still a good friend of mine. He came up for dinner like last week. And he was like, cool, we're a startup. That's our job. Our job is to figure things out. And I said, great. So I'll come join you. I'll have a period where I get to work with you. I'll take a period of leave. We'll figure out what that looks like. Who knows if I'll get pregnant like in a year or if this takes 5 years. You don't have to ask me about it. I was like, you don't check in with me. I'll check in with you kind of vibe. And then I did get pregnant and now I want to swear a lot, which is like, holy moly, it was really hard. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. And I have done a lot of hard things in my life. I have done some extreme athletic events, and I have really pushed myself in different ways. I was a college swimmer, among other things. And this one was surprising how much I struggled. And I was like, okay, wait, if I am a married, white, elite educated female who has a job that's only 10 to 6, in air quotes, only 10 to 6. And I got pregnant fairly easily. Like if I have a lot of things stacked in my favor and a lot of privilege in my corner, and I am finding this hard as crap. And I think this is kind of crazy. And I'm running into all of these biases about what pregnant women can do or should do or who they ought to be. And people who told me that, of course, I was going to jump off the work train and I was just going to become a mushy mommy brain who only wanted to be a mom for the rest of my life. I started hearing all these stories about people at 6 months and 7 months pregnant who would get fired from their jobs, but like kind of squeezed out. People who didn't understand what to do with them, people who would say derogatory comments like, enjoy your vacation, about a 3-month. If I were to say, hey, why don't you go not sleep for 3 months, run a marathon every single day, bring a human to life with your boobs and bleed out of your nether regions while wearing giant Depends diapers and having a very jiggly wiggly belly and maybe muscles that don't work that have been torn and ripped apart, enjoy your vacation, you'd be like, oh, that's not a vacation. That's not a vacation. But people would say, enjoy your vacation. And I ran into all of this and I said, if I think this is hard, I have no idea how other people are doing it. I have no idea. And so I was walking down the streets of New York City. It was really hot. When you're pregnant, you're hotter because you have almost doubled your blood volume. I was sweating like crazy. And I said, startup pregnant is freaking insane. But it led me to ask, what's happening? And why is this happening? And what are we overlooking with all of these assumptions? Because anytime you make an assumption or you repeat a cultural cliche, that's actually a wonderful area for disruption. All of the people in tech, and especially in Silicon Valley, that are scared of hiring women or mothers, that think pregnancy should look one way, or think that you ought to be on the mommy track, that is such a beautiful opportunity, because if you start to think differently about this, and this is one of my core philosophies in life and in business, you don't have to do things the way they've always been done.
Yes.
If we can think about it a little differently, we can maybe do things better or innovate in a way that lets us skyrocket faster than anyone else.
Yes. And so Startup Pregnant was birthed, pun intended.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, totally, pun intended.
So how did you start Startup Pregnant? What did that look like? Because, I mean, obviously you had this aha moment when you were pregnant with your first and you were in this startup and you had this idea. So then what took it to maybe not what it is today, but how did it at least get off the ground?
Yeah, it's interesting because I didn't think it was a business at first. So when I started, I said, this could be a really interesting book. I would love to tell my story of working in the startup world because we were also innovating and doing a lot of different things. We got to design our own maternity leave and parental leave policy. I negotiated a contract to work 4 days a week instead of 5, but at a full-time salary. So Wednesdays were my flex day, and I got to work from home, which ended up being really critical for being able to make it as a working mother. And there were all of these different things we were playing with. So I went to an agency in New York and I said, Startup Pregnant. I have an idea for a memoir, but it's also kind of a business book. What do you think? And they were like, this is an interesting concept. We have not seen a book like this, and we like it. So I thought I was writing a book, and I spent 8 months. I wrote parts of the proposal when my kid was 6 weeks old, because I would wake up in the middle of the night wanting to write on it. So I would write a couple things down and then go back to sleep for 3 hours. And I don't recommend this, and I wouldn't have been able to do other work, but the idea was so fresh that I wanted to capture it. And I started writing this proposal, but after about 8 months or 10 months working on it, we were kind of knocking heads. It wasn't working. And they said, well, I think it's because your story is interesting, but it's not quite compelling enough. And what they meant by that is a lot of times to hold a really good memoir together, you need some cliffhangers. Mm-hmm. You need a Cheryl Strayed. I hiked the whole Pacific Crest Trail. My mother died and I didn't have those. Like, I had a healthy baby and a great job. And that's not quite hooky enough for for people in marketing. It's not quite hooky enough for a story. And so they recommended I interview more women. And I started interviewing people. I interviewed about 30 women or so. And after I did all these interviews, I was just blown away. And I realized I shouldn't be having these conversations in private. I should be doing them in public on a podcast. Well, I didn't have the bandwidth to take on any more unpaid projects. Writing a book proposal is not a paid endeavor until you sell a book. And I was a new mom, and I had to make a living. So I said, well, I can start the podcast, but I want to see if I can get backers for it. So I went out and got sponsors before we even launched. So we had sponsors for the podcast who believed in the idea. And then at some point I went back to my husband and I was like, honey, this kind of looks and smells like a business. I am getting paid to do a thing that I think I just started a business. I thought I was writing a book. Then I thought I was making a podcast. But I think what I did was back myself into a business, and we laughed a lot about that. So it wasn't straightforward, like I'm going to start this business. And I've been podcasting now for a year. The sponsors have covered the costs of the operating costs. They have not created profit or paid me back. Like, they haven't paid me for my time, but they've covered the costs of editing and putting it together and web hosting and the copywriter who writes the show notes, things like that. And I said, well, if I'm going to take this to the next level, what's the next thing this community might need? And so earlier this year, about 6 months after we launched the podcast, we launched a mastermind community, a paid community for women who are entrepreneurs and mothers, or who are thinking about pregnancy and want to have these conversations in a space where we can be open and honest with each other. And I launched it while pregnant, because now I'm also, spoiler alert, I'm pregnant with my second kid right now while I'm running this business. And I launched it, and we filled our first class of women, and I'm running a mastermind, a paid kind of high-level mastermind with 6 women. And we're going to launch the next round of the mastermind after I come back from maternity leave. There's some full flexibility there because I don't know when I'm coming back from maternity leave. So it's generously like spring of 2019, which may be early spring or late spring, depending on how sleep deprived I am with this second kid. That's how it's tumbled so far. And I think it's got a lot more iterations unfolding.
Brilliant. Okay. So as you are first writing a book, then starting a podcast, realizing, oh, wait a second, I just started a business. And you're doing it. I mean, you're producing it, and you have an incredible following. I've noticed you have taken a really unique and I think smart approach to getting the word out about Startup Pregnant. One that I don't see many new business owners, like you said. I mean, you've been you've been in your industries and you've been doing your stuff for a long time. But Startup Pregnant, the podcast, really has only been around for a year. And yet you have a really good footprint going on right now, as far as I can tell. And I see your name showing up in not just on Instagram, not just on a blog, that sort of thing, but I'm seeing it show up in some pretty big places, right? And so can you take me into your strategy around being published, not just on your own stuff, but on other people's platforms?
Yeah, I love talking about this because I have a bit of my background is communications, but communications with a marketing angle, which is like, how do we tell stories? And part of telling stories is it's not just somebody shouting randomly, which my toddler does. It's also having a willing audience that wants to hear the story, right? It's being good enough and useful enough to somebody that receives it and says, hey, this is valuable. I think kind of even before we get into the guest publishing and tapping into other people's audiences as a strategy, something really important to remember is the power of niching down. And yes. I don't have a big audience. I have the right audience. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to or want to be somebody with 100,000 Instagram followers or 100,000 people on my email list. When we launched the mastermind, we had 300 people on our email list. It's not that big, right? Mm-hmm. I think that would surprise a lot of people. They're like, wait, what? I see so many people bemoan, I only have 100 people on my email list. And to me, if you had 100 people in a coffee shop showing up to listen to you speak, you would be floored. Yes. That would be the coolest thing.
Yeah,
to have 100 people in a room with you. So often we're like, oh, I have to get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's like, well, no, you don't. Depending on what you're offering, unless you're trying to go for something at scale, like you're selling a $10 product and you want 10,000 people to buy it, it depends on what you're selling. And if I sell a $5,000 mastermind, I don't need 5,000 people to buy it. In fact, I couldn't do that. I could not have that many phone calls one-on-one with people. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it that way, what I want to reach female founders who are right at that moment of thinking about pregnancy and they're invested in business and entrepreneurship. And then it's a small targeted audience. I'm not trying to reach the CEO of Evernote, I forget his name, or somebody else. If they listen to the podcast because they think it's interesting, by all means, it's free, it's out there, I'm happy to have you. So we launched when we had 300 people on the email list and about 1,000 downloads per episode. And I say these numbers because I want to really ground, if people are doing stuff like this, it doesn't have to be big to work. It just has to be the right people.
Thank you so much for going there, because when I say a solid audience and a great foundation of people who are following you, that's exactly what I mean. And unfortunately, when we say those things, sometimes I think a lot of times what is heard from that is big. But I know from listening and following, it's not necessarily big. It's super high quality. You are known for this one thing and you have fully leaned into it and therefore attracted the exact people who are interested and need that information. So it's about the quality of the people in your audience. So thank you for taking us there and camping out there for a second. Yes. Okay.
Yes. So the thing is especially with podcast downloads, which I can get really geeky about, but you can have 500 people go in, click, oh, I want to listen to that podcast. And then what your phone does or your iTunes does is it downloads it in the background, but people might not actually listen to it. Would you rather have 500 people that have downloaded and never listened, and they may even be bots from some random state? Or would you rather have 500 people and the people are, and this is what started happening, which kind of shocked me and also shouldn't have surprised me. When you have a high quality conversation about what it means to be a female founder in your 30s and have kids, I had people email me that were the head of business operations at some of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley, huge. I had somebody from Facebook email me and say, we've required this for all of our product managers. I had somebody, Vanessa Van Edwards, who runs this huge YouTube channel, and she runs the Science of People Lab. And she's had a TED Talk and a best-selling book called Captivate. She reached out and she was like, I literally cannot wait for every single episode to come out because I'm pregnant right now and I need to figure this out. And I just need these conversations. So it really tapped into something. And if you have those people listening, different world. I would take 5 of those over 500,000 bots any day.
Yes.
You know?
Amen. That's a great reframe. So let's hit back on that media relations, getting in front of, I mean, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty strategy. I just see it as a unique part of how you're showing up and where I'm seeing you. Like just randomly, I'll just see your name in places that I just already am. I'm like, that's pretty cool that she's there. Right. And so can you take us into why you've gone that route?
Yeah. I think one of the first things that you can do to grow an audience is, well, the first thing you can do is tell your friends about it. Tell your friends and your family and your existing network. You probably know more than you think. But after that, it's really hard to convert cold leads. It's hard to play the Google AdWords game or the Facebook ad game. It's so much easier to go to places where people already are, places that people know and trust, and say, what swimming pools could I show up at that people would actually want to buy sunscreen, right? Like where is a place that people are already hanging out, doing the thing that I do, where the thing that I offer is useful. And there's there's a couple of elements to this for Startup Pregnant in particular. Because we're a podcast and that's been our primary content platform, where would you find people that listen to podcasts? You find them listening to podcasts. So if I can get myself onto other podcasts, it's a much easier thing to invite somebody who's listening to a podcast to also listen to mine, because people listen to like an average of 30 or 40 different shows, which is amazing. And podcast listenership is growing right now versus trying to teach someone how to listen to a podcast that has never done it before. Like I've been trying for a long time to get my dad to listen to this podcast. It's taken about a year. Somebody who listens to podcasts already, like you, or has a podcast themselves, you're like, oh, I know how to do this. I've already been taught. I've got all the apps set up. Super easy to search. So one of my first strategies I called podcast tour, and I wanted to get on as many podcasts as possible. And I reached out to friends and friends of friends, and I said, hey, here are some stories I have. These are some of the things I can talk about. I'm biased. I think they're pretty interesting, but you tell me if you think they'd be interesting for your audience. And I'd love to come jam with you. And some of the stories are really fun. Like I've tested them before. I've been on stage. I've been on podcasts before, and I've told them and they've gotten really great feedback. So I also have some level of trust that I'm not pitching myself like, hey, I'm cool, listen to me. But instead I'm like, hey, I want to tell you about a naked Alcatraz swim I did. And people go, huh? I want to hear that story. And I'm like, great, let me come talk with you. Also, I like having conversations and you do too. So maybe we could also be friends, right? It's much more playful and fun. And that was the first strategy. And then the second one is trying to get in front of audiences, like by guest writing, that are women specific, entrepreneurship specific, female founders, business owners, places like that.
Now, I don't know how familiar you are with what I teach and preach about marketing, but it's all about finding what your marketing personality type is and aligning your strategy with that personality type, kind of letting go of all the shoulds and finding those things that are going to feel good for you. And it seems like now that I listen to you explain all of this, it seems like this one common thread for you has been writing. Writing has kind of always been there. What is that for? Have you noticed that? And what is that for you? Has writing kind of always been the thing for you?
You nailed it. You 100%. You nailed it. And that's one of the biggest threads of my life. I really like explaining things to people, and I really like going deep. So personality-wise, I'm INFJ. I'm introverted. I always joke with people that I'm a writer, a swimmer, and a gardener for a reason. Like I like a lot of solo time, but I like it because I like going deep and thinking about complex patterns and issues. And writing is a place for me to explore big ideas with almost unlimited space. You can write as much as you want and just keep going down the rabbit hole. It's one of my favorite things. Yes.
And the fact that you just said that you're an INFJ, just hugest smile just went across my face because INFJs are really, really great at long form content. And usually that looks like written content because they always go deeper than most other people do in their brain. And so they need that space to let all of those thoughts and ideas really percolate and come around and connect and all of those deeper levels. So hit the nail on the head. So cool that you have found that and that you've leaned into that. And I'm sure the podcast is an extension of that too, because your podcast interviews they're not surface level either. I mean, for crying out loud, you're talking about one of the biggest changes a human can go through, and that's birthing a baby. So, I mean, we're not really skimming the surface when we're talking about something like that. So yet again, it feels so aligned. I'd like to spend just a minute or two understanding how you approach, especially as the founder of Startup Pregnant and someone who is pregnant right now, not only just, a few months in, but girl, you're getting there, right? Like you're staring down the...
Yeah. I've only a few weeks left. Only a few weeks left. Yeah.
Few weeks. Yeah. This podcast episode is going to go live on October 11th. So I don't know. Are you right around that time? Okay.
Maybe, we may have another week or two to wait. We don't know yet.
Okay. Yeah. Who knows? But as you're walking into this second round and you're looking at taking some time off, I see some similarities. I'm also looking at taking some time off in October. And as entrepreneurs, as doers, as movers and shakers, I don't know about you, but that can maybe feel a little scary because it's a complete reversal. It feels like a complete reversal of what you do every day and what kind of lights you up and gives you, whether healthy or not, some identity. And so how do you approach your maternity leaves or sabbaticals or that extended time off, being that you are an entrepreneur and you're running a business?
I think this is such an interesting question because taking time away from a business is actually, to me, it's one of the great tests of the integrity of a business. And I think we've gotten so wrapped up in work culture in America where it's like always on. We work 50 hours a week. People take their smartphones and their laptops with them on vacation. That one of the unintended side effects is that we end up designing poorly designed businesses that would fall apart if we left for a month or two. And yeah. I think everybody needs to be able to leave their business for a month or two and have it function, or at least be able to take a break. And if we can't do that, I think we're building really fragile businesses. So for me, it's just a cool opportunity. And this is one of those ways when we were talking about rethinking what the entrepreneurial kind of startup pregnant landscape looks like. It's like, what if pregnancy is actually a litmus test for whether or not a business is any good? Ooh, that's one of my favorite questions. Because if you can't take leave from your business without it falling apart, that's rough. And there are exceptions to that rule. Sometimes in the beginning when you're hustling to get clients and you've got a steep upward trajectory, you can't take time off for 18 months, but things are changing. But I would caution us that anyone can break a leg at any time, or, maybe it's not that dire. So I just think it's so interesting. I also think that a lot of entrepreneurs can love what they do, but I'm not sure that working more is the goal. I want to love what I do and do it 20 hours a week. How cool would that be?
Yeah.
Right? How cool would it be to have the systems that are set up? So for me, when thinking about taking maternity leave, and I'm running a mastermind program right across it, which is interesting. It's been an experiment, and I'm going to keep the podcast going. One of the questions I had was, what do I keep and what do I let go of? And what's important and what's not? And the hardest thing, I don't think I've gotten this right necessarily in this iteration, like this current maternity leave that I'm taking. But I don't think that working twice as hard beforehand to take a break is actually the best solution. I just think that's moving work around and then working too hard and then you're exhausted. So I'm trying to cut at least 50% from my plate and then create systems that can run without me. So for my mastermind, I have guest teachers coming in. They're all running it in my place. I'm not going to be there for 3 months. All of the people in my mastermind know that I'm having a baby and signed up knowing that I was pregnant. And I have given them clear instructions, which is if I'm not there and the guest teacher doesn't show up, you still show up for each other. You know the system, you know how this works, you go through the program and you hold each other accountable. And that's the way that this is going to work. So it's been cool because it's been a new design challenge for taking leave. Like, do I need to be there? And if I'm not there, what does it look like instead?
Yes. That's a really inspiring and crucial reframe. I'm seeing that also in my business because at the time of this recording, I have not many. I can't do the math off the top of my head, but probably about 15 more days of working before I'm out. And you're right. There is a very crucial triage that you have to do. And it's this prioritization and this, I don't want to say forced, but almost forced to make the choice of, okay, what really matters here? Because it can't all be done in the next 15 days unless I sacrifice my own health, my relationship, other things. And so you have to prioritize. And the fact I had not thought about this yet, but I'm so glad we're having this conversation at this moment in time, realizing that those are the types of questions that create stronger businesses in the long run. When you're in the moment and you have to make the decision what actually is priority here and what actually needs to happen rather than the things that you feel like need to happen, but really doesn't matter that much, that's what creates a stronger, more sustainable business. So key and really encouraging.
I think it's such an interesting question. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'm sure a tough one for sure. A tough one, especially if someone's gone through a long vacation, a sabbatical, a maternity leave, and realized that everything went to crap. But you live and learn, right? So it might be a difficult thing to face and a beneficial one, right? It's a yes and situation there. So.
Exactly. I think there's two reasons why it's so hard. One of them is our ego. One of the reasons we try to do all the things and keep busy is because we want to believe we're important.
Yes.
And when we say, oh, well, what happens if I tell my podcast listeners that I'm going to be gone for a month? The question that's kind of underneath in our nervous system is, well, won't they miss me? They're going to miss me. Am I important? Will they miss me if I'm gone? That's a really hard question to grapple with. And then the other reason it's so hard is because decisions, when you make a decision, the Latin root of the word decide is actually related to scissors and cesarean section and seed, which is the decision part of it. It means to cut off. So you have two things and you have to cut one off, like you're breaking a wishbone in half. And then you have to discard one of them. And that is a very painful process. So most of us avoid it. And when you decide to do something like take a sabbatical, you're grappling with questions of, am I important? And what do I cut out of my life or my business plans? And those are kind of painful questions to ask. So we instead prefer to avoid them, much to our detriment, because sometimes they can be the most freeing and the most aligned in terms of creating really beautiful strategies.
So good and so timely. I want to share a little, I don't know what to call it, just divine timing with everyone that's listening right now, because Sarah and I had this interview scheduled for last week, and then my power went out and we weren't able to do the interview. And I can tell you right now, Sarah, this conversation we're having right now, 100% needed to be had today for me. And so I'm just, I'm so grateful that we were able to connect today specifically. And yeah, man, I'm just having that moment of gratitude right now because it's so cool how it's just aligning. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up, and I would love for you to tell the listeners where they can go find you online.
Yeah, so I'm at startuppregnant.com, or we're at startuppregnant on Instagram and Twitter. And then, listen to our podcast if you like podcasts. We're a weekly show, and you can search for the Startup Pregnant podcast in iTunes or wherever you listen. We love our listeners, and we try to make really great shows, just like Brit.
Yeah, literally one of my absolute favorite podcasts I've ever listened to. Will not miss an episode. So yes, go listen to that and go check her out. Send her some love, and then hop into our private Facebook group to hear even more from Sarah over the next few days. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Marketing in Yoga Pants podcast. Keep the conversation going by visiting marketinginyogapants.com/Facebook, where you'll get to join that private Facebook group I've been talking so much about. There, you'll get to chat with our podcast guests, yeah, they're in there too, and all of the other brilliant creative business owners. We're connecting, we're meeting our soul sisters, and we're building our businesses, all while in yoga pants. So come hang out with us. Again, visit marketinginyogapants.com/Facebook to get in. And one more thing. If you dig this podcast, would you be awesome and share it with someone? This entire Marketing in Yoga Pants movement is nothing without its community. So please share. And if you're really feeling the love right now, jump into iTunes. You're probably already there if you're listening to this right now. And leave us a rating and review. The more of those we rack up, the more the podcast will be found by ladies like you, and the stronger this community becomes. This episode was edited and produced by the Podcast Engineers. They're pretty great, so go find them at podcastengineers.com. This episode was also brought to you by my online marketing agency, Jam Marketing Group, and you can find us at jammarketinggroup.co. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you back here next week on the Marketing in Yoga Pants podcast. Love ya. Bye.